They invited her so they could laugh at her. A powerful CEO's wife sent a black tie invitation to a black waitress, not because she belonged in the room, but because they wanted to watch her walk in, feel small, and be humiliated in front of the richest people in the city. What they didn't know was that the woman they planned to mock had once ruled rooms far greater than theirs, carried a name that built fortunes, and survived a fall that would have destroyed them. So when Adama finally stepped out of that car, dressed in quiet power and unshakable dignity, the laughter died, the music stopped, and an entire elite circle realized too late that they had just invited their own disgrace. They invited her to laugh at her, not to honor her, not to welcome her, not because she belonged. The CEO's wife invited a black waitress to a luxury black tie gala because she wanted a joke, and Adama was supposed to be it. What no one knew was that the woman they planned to humiliate had already survived something far worse than their cruelty. And this time, she was done disappearing. Adama Diallo had mastered the art of being invisible, not because she wanted to, but because life had taught her that visibility came with a price she could no longer afford. At 29, she worked as a waitress at the Meridian Club, a private business lounge reserved for executives, politicians, and investors who spoke in low voices about money that could change entire cities. She wore the same uniform every day: black dress, white apron, flat shoes. Hair pulled back, makeup minimal, eyes lowered. Not weak, just careful. The guests rarely looked at her face. They spoke to her hands, to the tray she carried, to the space she occupied temporarily before moving on to something more important. And then there was Evelyn Cross. Evelyn was not just rich, she was certain of it. The wife of Richard Cross, CEO of Crossway Holdings, she walked into rooms like they owed her applause. Diamonds on her neck, ice in her smile. She noticed Adama the way one notices a stain on expensive fabric. "Waitress," Evelyn snapped one afternoon, barely glancing up from her phone. "This glass has fingerprints. Do better." Adama apologized softly and replaced it. She always did. But Evelyn wasn't satisfied with obedience. She wanted submission. There was something about Adama's quiet dignity that irritated her. The straight posture, the calm eyes, the refusal to shrink completely. So Evelyn watched her. And one afternoon, during a champagne-fueled luncheon with her friends, Evelyn laughed and said the words that would change everything. "You know what would be hilarious?" she said, swirling her glass. "If she actually thought she belonged with us." Her friends leaned in. "She walks around like she's invisible," Evelyn continued. "Let's see how she handles being seen." That was when the plan was born. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Adama was clearing a table when it appeared on her tray. Thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering. She stopped walking. Her heart skipped. This was not something meant for people like her. Before she could speak, Evelyn leaned close, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Don't lose it," she whispered sweetly. "It's very exclusive." Adama opened it later in the staff restroom, hands trembling. "You are cordially invited to the Crossway Black Tie Anniversary Gala. Silvercrest Estate, Saturday, 7 p.m. Her name was written in elegant script. Adama sat down hard on the bench. She understood immediately. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't inclusion. It was a setup. Evelyn wanted her to show up underdressed, uncomfortable, exposed. Wanted the whispers, the laughter, the sideways glances that said, "What is she doing here?" They wanted to remind her of her place. That night, Adama didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her small apartment, listening to the city breathe outside her window. The invitation lay on the table like a challenge. She could tear it up, pretend it never happened, protect herself. But something inside her, something old and stubborn, refused. She stood and walked to the back of her closet. Behind folded uniforms and worn shoes sat a locked suitcase she hadn't opened in years. When she opened it, the air felt heavier. Inside were photographs of another life. Adama in tailored dresses. Adama standing beside powerful men. Adama smiling. Not because she had to, but because she believed in something. At the bottom lay a document with her full name printed boldly. Adama Diallo. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. They can take your position, your money, even your home, but never let them take your name. Her throat tightened. She picked up her phone. There was only one number she had never deleted. When the voice on the other end answered, shocked and breathless, Adama finally spoke the truth she had buried for years. "They think I'm nothing," she said quietly. "And I think it's time they remember who I am." The invitation sat on the cracked laminate counter of Adama's apartment, its gold embossing catching the dim light from the single bulb overhead. She stared at it, her reflection ghosting across the glossy surface. Tired eyes, worn features, hands marked by years of carrying trays and scrubbing tables. But once, those hands had signed contracts worth millions. Her name hadn't always been whispered with pity or spoken in the clipped tones of impatient customers. Adama Diallo had been spoken with reverence, with expectation, with the weight of legacy behind it. The Diallo family had been untouchable. Her father, Mamadou Diallo, had built an investment empire that stretched across West Africa and into Europe. Her mother, Eminata, had channeled their wealth into schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects that changed lives. Adama had been their crown jewel, educated at the Sorbonne, fluent in 4 languages, groomed from birth to carry the family torch into the next generation. She had believed in it all: the mission, the responsibility, the power to do good. At 26, she'd returned from Paris to take her place at the helm of Diallo Investments. The business community had watched with interest. Political allies had courted her favor. She'd been profiled in magazines, invited to summits, introduced as the future of African enterprise. Then came the audit. Millions missing. Funds diverted through shell companies. Contracts awarded to phantom firms. The trail led directly to accounts bearing the Diallo name, signatures that looked like hers, approvals she'd never given. But the evidence was damning, irrefutable. Her father's most trusted partners, men who'd eaten at their table, who'd called her daughter, had orchestrated it perfectly. They'd used the family's credibility as cover while they drained the coffers, and when the scheme unraveled, they'd ensured every thread pointed back to the Diallos. Political enemies, the ones her family had stood against, the ones who'd resented their influence and independence, seized the moment. Headlines screamed of corruption. Investigations were launched with theatrical urgency. Assets were frozen before her family could even mount a defense. The family name became synonymous with betrayal. Adama had stood in government offices, in courtrooms, in front of journalists, proclaiming their innocence. But no one wanted to hear it. The narrative was too perfect, the scandal too delicious, the opportunity to topple the Diallos too valuable. Her father died first, a heart attack, they said, but Adama knew it was a broken spirit. Her mother followed 3 months later. Some called it grief. Adama called it murder, just a slower kind. At 28, Adama had nothing. No family, no fortune, no future. The day after her mother's funeral, she'd stood in the empty house where she'd grown up, surrounded by furniture covered in dust sheets and paintings that would be auctioned to pay legal fees. She'd looked at herself in the grand hallway mirror and made a decision. She could fight. She could spend years trying to clear a name no one wanted cleared, chasing justice in a system designed to protect the powerful who destroyed her. Or she could disappear. The woman in that mirror, Adama Diallo, heiress, leader, symbol, died that day. She buried her with her parents, with her education, with every dream she'd carried. She'd become invisible by choice. A waitress, a nobody, someone people looked through rather than at. It was survival, not life. But survival was all she'd had left to cling to. Until now. Adama picked up the invitation again, her thumb tracing the embossed letters of her name. The Unity Gala, a fundraiser for exactly the kind of causes her mother had championed. And somehow, impossibly, she'd been invited. They didn't know who she was. They couldn't. To them, she was just Adama, the waitress who served their meals, efficient and forgettable. But she knew who they were. She'd served some of the people who would attend that gala. She'd heard their conversations, seen their faces, watched them make deals and alliances over appetizers. Some of them had stood silent while her family was destroyed. Some had participated, and one of them, she was certain, knew the truth. Her hands steadied. The trembling that had defined the past 5 years seemed to quiet. For the first time since the world had collapsed around her, Adama felt something other than numbness. She would attend the gala. They'd invited a waitress. But the woman they'd buried was still alive. Evelyn Cross stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her dressing room, smoothing the fabric of a gown that cost more than most people earned in a year. The emerald silk complemented the diamonds at her throat, an anniversary gift from Richard, though she suspected his assistant had chosen them. She tilted her head, examining her reflection with the critical eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime measuring her worth in appearances. 43 and fighting it. Beautiful and aware that beauty faded. Wealthy and perpetually conscious that the wealth wasn't hers. It was Richard's. It had always been Richard's. She was Mrs. Richard Cross, hostess, socialite, ornament. A position she'd secured through charm and calculation, but one that left her forever in his shadow. At events, people greeted her politely before their eyes slid past, searching for him. In conversations, her opinions were acknowledged with indulgent smiles before the discussion returned to business. His domain, not hers. The Unity Gala was supposed to be different. It was her event, her initiative, her moment to shine. But even that had been reduced to Richard Cross and his wife's charity function in the press coverage. The invitation to Adama had been an impulse, born from that familiar frustration. A small, petty rebellion. A reminder that she could still affect people, still make them feel small, still exercise power, even if it was the power to humiliate. "Darling, you're wicked," her friend Margot had said over lunch at the club, her eyes bright with delighted scandal. "Inviting your waitress to the gala? What possessed you?" Evelyn had smiled, sipping her wine. "Call it a social experiment. She served us last week looking so drab and defeated. I thought, wouldn't it be charitable to invite her? Let her see how the other half lives." Margot had laughed, understanding the cruelty beneath the charitable veneer. "She'll be mortified. Can you imagine her showing up in whatever sad little dress she can afford, surrounded by couture and jewels?" "If she shows up at all," Evelyn had replied, "I imagine she'll stare at that invitation and realize she doesn't belong." It's a kindness, really. A reminder of one's place in the world. The conversation had continued, each woman contributing observations about people they considered beneath them, the hired help, the service workers, the ones who existed to make their lives comfortable, but who were never quite real, never quite human in the way they were human. Evelyn had felt powerful in that moment. Seen. Important. It was a feeling she craved more than she cared to admit. Now, 3 days before the gala, she hosted a planning meeting in her sitting room. 6 women arranged on designer furniture, discussing seating charts and auction items over champagne and canapes prepared by staff they didn't acknowledge. "The mayor's confirmed," Victoria announced. "And the Hendersons are bringing that tech mogul from San Francisco." "Wonderful," Evelyn replied, making notes. "We'll seat them near Richard. He's been courting Henderson's portfolio." "Speaking of unusual guests," Diane said with a sly smile, "Margot told me about your little invitation. Has the waitress RSVP'd?" The room erupted in knowing laughter. Evelyn waved a dismissive hand, though she felt a flutter of satisfaction at being the center of attention. "Of course not. I'm sure she took one look at the invitation and recognized it for what it was, completely beyond her reach." "But what if she does come?" someone asked. "Then we'll be gracious," Evelyn said smoothly. "We'll smile, we'll make polite conversation, and we'll let her feel thoroughly out of place without saying a word. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let people see the distance between where they are and where they'll never be." The women nodded, their agreement unspoken but absolute. They understood hierarchy. They understood that their position required someone to be beneath them, and that maintaining that distance was essential to their identity. After they left, Evelyn returned to her mirror. She told herself the invitation had been harmless. A joke. A momentary amusement that the waitress had surely already dismissed. Adama wouldn't come. She couldn't. People like that understood their limitations. Across the city, in a modest apartment, Adama stood before her own mirror, zipping up a dress that had once been worn to a summit in Geneva. It still fit. 5 years of carrying trays had kept her lean, and she'd preserved a few pieces from her former life, hidden away like artifacts from a civilization everyone believed extinct. She looked elegant, composed, powerful. She looked like herself. What Evelyn didn't know was that humiliation cuts both ways. The address hadn't changed. Adama stood outside the brownstone in the older, quieter part of the city, her hand hovering over the buzzer. 5 years. She'd promised herself she wouldn't reach back into that former life, wouldn't drag anyone else into the wreckage of who she'd been. But she couldn't do this alone. She pressed the button. The voice through the intercom was older, wearier. Yes. Seraphine. It's Adama. Silence. Then the door clicked open. Seraphine Kouassi stood at the top of the stairs, her silver locks twisted into an elegant crown, her dark skin smooth despite the years that had passed. She'd been more than a stylist to the Diallo family. She'd been an advisor, a strategist, someone who understood that presentation was power and that every entrance was a negotiation. Her eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. Mon Dieu, Adama. They stood frozen, two women separated by years and trauma and choices made in desperation. Then Seraphine descended the stairs and pulled Adama into her arms. I looked for you, Seraphine whispered fiercely. After everything happened. You vanished. I had to. I know. Seraphine pulled back, her hands gripping Adama's shoulders, her eyes scanning her face. But you're here now. What? Adama reached into her bag and withdrew the invitation. Seraphine read it, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like pride. You're going to attend. I'm tired of hiding, Adama said quietly. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of letting them believe they won. Seraphine studied her for a long moment. This isn't about revenge. No. Then what is it about? Adama met her eyes. Reclamation. The word hung between them, weighted with intention. Not destruction, not vindication. Simply the act of taking back what had been stolen, not money or status, but self. Seraphine nodded slowly. Then we have work to do. The apartment that had once been Seraphine's workspace was smaller than Adama remembered, but it still held racks of clothing, mirrors positioned to catch every angle, and the meticulous organization of someone who treated appearance as architecture. You've kept everything, Adama said, surprised. I kept clients, Seraphine replied. Just more quietly. Not everyone abandoned principle when your family fell. She pulled a garment bag from the back of a closet. Including this. I held on to it. Something told me you might need it one day. Inside was a dress Adama had commissioned but never worn. Midnight blue, deceptively simple, expertly tailored. It had been made for a conference that never happened, for a version of herself that had disappeared before she could inhabit it. Try it on. The fabric whispered against her skin like memory. When Adama looked in the mirror, she saw echoes of who she'd been, but the woman staring back was different. Harder, clearer. Someone who'd survived what should have destroyed her. It still fits, Seraphine observed. Now we work on everything else. They spend hours in preparation, but not the superficial kind. Seraphine didn't fuss with makeup or jewelry. Instead, she made Adama walk. Again, she said, you're still moving like someone trying not to be noticed. Adama crossed the room, her steps measured, her shoulders straight. Better, but you're thinking too much. When you walk into that gala, you can't be performing confidence. You must embody certainty. What's the difference? Confidence can be questioned. Certainty simply is. Seraphine positioned herself across the room. You're not returning as a supplicant. You're not asking for anything. You're reminding them of something they tried to forget. They practice silence, the art of letting others fill uncomfortable space with their own anxiety. They practiced restraint, responding to provocation with composure rather than defense. They practiced presence, the ability to command attention without demanding it. You'll be tempted to explain yourself, Seraphine warned. Don't. You owe them nothing, not even your story. And if they ask why I'm there, you were invited. Simple, complete, unassailable. As the sun set, Adama stood before the mirror one final time. Her hair was pulled back, elegant but unfussy. The dress moved with her like water. Her posture spoke of someone who'd earned her place through survival rather than inheritance. She didn't look arrogant. She looked certain. Seraphine stood beside her, their reflections side by side. Two women who understood that sometimes reclamation meant walking back into the room that once erased you and refusing to disappear again. You're ready, Seraphine said quietly. Adama nodded. They'd prepared her to walk into a room that once erased her. The Silver Crest estate glowed like a jewel box against the night sky, every window blazing with golden light. Cars lined the curved driveway, sleek sedans, luxury SUVs, vehicles whose price tags exceeded annual salaries. Photographers clustered near the entrance, cameras ready to capture arrivals for the society pages. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and canapes. A string quartet played something classical and unobtrusive. The city's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, their laughter polished, their conversations laden with names dropped like currency. Evelyn Cross stood near the entrance in a gown of champagne silk, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. She positioned herself strategically, greeting arrivals, accepting compliments, basking in the attention that came with hostessing the event of the season. Evelyn, darling, it's magnificent. A woman gushed, air-kissing both cheeks. Thank you. We wanted to do something truly special this year. Evelyn's smile was practiced perfection. Margot appeared at her elbow, champagne in hand, eyes bright with gossip. So, has your waitress made an appearance? Evelyn laughed, the sound carrying just enough edge to convey her disdain. Of course not. I told you she wouldn't dare. Probably wise. Can you imagine? Her little off-the-rack dress next to all this. Margot gestured at the room, at the wealth displayed so casually it seemed almost accidental. Some people understand their limitations, Evelyn replied. It's actually quite mature of her to recognize she doesn't belong. But even as she said it, something flickered in her chest. Not quite disappointment, but perhaps the faint ache of a punchline that would never land. The joke required an audience, a humiliation witnessed. Without Adama's presence, it was just an invitation sent and ignored. Still, Evelyn told herself she'd won. The waitress had known her place. The evening progressed. The mayor arrived. Tech executives mingled with old money. Richard worked the room with the ease of someone accustomed to power, and Evelyn orbited him, playing her role. Then the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple of attention, heads turning toward the entrance, conversations faltering mid-sentence. The string quartet continued playing, but the energy had changed, pulled toward something just outside the ballroom doors. A black car had arrived, elegant but not ostentatious. The driver opened the rear door. A woman emerged. She moved with the kind of grace that couldn't be taught, only earned through years of navigating rooms exactly like this one. Her dress was midnight blue, simple in line but devastating in execution, the kind of garment that whispered rather than shouted wealth. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face of striking composure. No excessive jewelry, no desperate attempts at glamour. Just certainty. She ascended the entrance steps with measured purpose, her posture speaking of someone who'd been born to spaces like this, not someone begging entry. The photographers, sensing something, raised their cameras. Inside, the silence spread like spilled wine. Who is that? Someone whispered. I don't know. She looks important. Is she foreign? European maybe. That dress is definitely couture. Evelyn turned toward the entrance, her smile still fixed, ready to greet another guest. Then she saw her. Recognition hit like ice water. The waitress. Impossible, but unmistakably her. The same woman who'd served them salmon and refilled water glasses, who'd moved through their world invisible and dismissed. Except she wasn't invisible now. Adama entered the ballroom as though she'd never left spaces like this, as though the past 5 years had been intermission rather than exile. Her eyes swept the room with calm assessment, acknowledging the attention without courting it. People parted instinctively, creating a path. She walked toward the main floor, her movements unhurried. She passed within feet of Evelyn, close enough that their eyes met for one crystalline moment. Adama's expression held no anger, no triumph, no acknowledgement of their previous dynamic. She simply looked at Evelyn the way one might look at furniture, present but irrelevant. Then she continued past without pausing, without bowing, without any gesture that suggested she owed explanation or deference. Evelyn stood frozen, champagne glass trembling in her hand. Her mouth opened slightly, words failing. Around her, guests whispered with increasing interest. "Did you see that dress? The way she carries herself, definitely someone. Why don't we know her?" Margot gripped Evelyn's arm. That's the waitress," she hissed, disbelief strangling her voice. But the room didn't see a waitress. They saw elegance, mystery, power. They saw someone who belonged in ways that transcended invitation. Evelyn's carefully constructed evening tilted on its axis. The joke she'd crafted, the humiliation she'd orchestrated, the superiority she'd tried to claim, all of it collapsed. Because the joke had required Adama to be small, diminished, obviously out of place. Instead, she'd walked in like she owned not just the room, but herself. The joke died the moment she stepped inside. Adama moved through the ballroom with deliberate calm, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. One who nodded at her with professional courtesy, perhaps recognizing something familiar in her ease with being served. She positioned herself near one of the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens, observing rather than participating. The whispers continued around her, speculation building like pressure in a closed system. Then a voice cut through the murmur, sharp with recognition. "Adama? Adama Diallo?" The room didn't go silent, not immediately. But conversations faltered, attention shifted. The voice belonged to Laurent Beaumont, a French investor in his 60s whose portfolio spanned 3 continents. He approached Adama with an expression caught between disbelief and delight. "Monsieur Beaumont." Adama extended her hand, her composure absolute. He took it in both of his eyes bright. "Mon Dieu, it is you. I heard. We all heard what happened to your family. The scandal was unconscionable. I tried to reach out, but—" He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. People had been afraid to associate with the Diallos once the accusations flew. "I chose to step away," Adama said quietly. "It seemed wisest. But you're here now." His voice carried, projecting across the nearby clusters of guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize who this is? This is Adama Diallo, daughter of Mamadou and Aminata Diallo." The name rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Diallo. The older guests recognized it first, their faces shifting from curiosity to shock to something like shame. The Diallo family had been legendary, their fall spectacular and recent enough to be remembered viscerally. "The Diallos," someone whispered. "The investment family?" The scandal wasn't their fraud. They said the charges were questionable. Political, maybe. Her parents died, didn't they? She disappeared completely. Everyone thought. A tech mogul who'd been examining his phone looked up sharply. Diallo Investments funded the infrastructure project in Senegal that won the UNESCO award, and the education initiative in Côte d'Ivoire. Her mother built 12 hospitals. An older woman added, memory clarifying. "I met her once. Remarkable woman." The narrative was reconstructing itself in real time. The Diallo legacy separating from the scandal that had buried it. These were people who understood reputation, who knew how easily it could be weaponized, who'd perhaps participated in similar destructions themselves. And now, standing before them in midnight blue, was living proof that the destroyed could return. All eyes turned toward Evelyn, who stood near the entrance looking as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. Her champagne silk suddenly seemed too bright, too desperate. Her diamonds glittered with the wrong kind of shine. Margot had abandoned her, retreating into the crowd. Richard Cross materialized at his wife's elbow, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes cold. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "what have you done?" I didn't know." Evelyn stammered, her practiced composure fracturing. She was just a waitress. How was I supposed to know? The words carried farther than she intended. Several guests turned, their expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. "A waitress?" Laurent said, his voice sharp. "You knew Adama Diallo was working as a waitress and you invited her here as what?" "Entertainment." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Adama set down her champagne glass with careful precision. The small sound somehow commanded more attention than any shout could have. She turned to face the room, and the crowd shifted, creating space, granting her the floor without being asked. When she spoke, her voice was measured, carrying the weight of someone who'd learned the value of words through their absence. 5 years ago, I lost everything. My family, my name, my future. I learned what it meant to be invisible, to serve people who looked through me rather than at me, to be useful but not human, to exist in spaces without belonging to them. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, landing briefly on faces she recognized from her former life. People who'd once courted her family's favor and then fled when the scandal broke. I was invited here as a joke, a reminder of my place, my limits, my supposed insignificance. Her eyes found Evelyn's. But what I learned in 5 years of invisibility is this: dignity cannot be given or taken by others. It can only be surrendered by ourselves. The silence was absolute now. I came tonight not for revenge, but for reclamation. To remind myself, and perhaps others, that worth is not measured in wealth or position. It's measured in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. How we see those society tells us are invisible. She nodded slightly, a gesture of conclusion rather than submission. The applause started slowly, Laurent first, then others joining, building into something genuine and sustained. It wasn't polite charity gala clapping. It was recognition. Evelyn stood frozen, her social power crumbling with every second of applause that wasn't for her. Richard had already moved away, distancing himself. Adama accepted the recognition with quiet grace, then turned back toward the window, done performing. She'd come as a guest, and she'd left as a reminder. Evelyn Cross left her own gala 40 minutes after Adama's speech. She didn't announce her departure. She simply slipped through a side entrance, her champagne silk dress catching on the doorframe as she fled. A few guests noticed, their eyes tracking her exit with the detached interest of people witnessing a fall from grace that didn't concern them personally. Richard stayed. He had investments to discuss, connections to maintain. His wife's humiliation was unfortunate, but ultimately separate from his agenda. He'd address it later, privately, in the way powerful men addressed inconvenient failures. For now, the evening belonged to someone else. Adama remained by the window, her champagne untouched, as guests approached in careful succession. They came with different offerings, apologies, justifications, opportunities, each one revealing more about the speaker than about her. "Adama, I want you to know I never believed the charges," a former colleague said, his voice low, urgent. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too neat. She nodded, not absolving him for his silence when it might have mattered, but acknowledging the admission. "If you're considering returning to investment work," a woman from a European firm offered, "we'd be honored to discuss opportunities. Your family's approach to ethical development is more relevant now than ever. We're launching a foundation," another guest added, "focused on supporting families destroyed by false accusations." your experience, your name. It would mean everything to have your involvement. They meant well, most of them. But Adama heard what lay beneath the offers. Redemption through association, the chance to be on the right side of a narrative they'd once abandoned. They wanted to help rebuild the Diallo legacy, but they also wanted proximity to the story, to be characters in her resurrection. Laurent Beaumont approached last, his expression more thoughtful than the others. "They're offering you pity dressed as opportunity," he observed quietly. "I know. You don't need it." "No." He smiled, a flash of genuine respect. "Your mother would be proud, not of what you've endured, but of who you've remained despite it." That reached her in a way the other offers hadn't. She felt the tightness in her chest, the grief that 5 years hadn't diminished, only compressed. "Thank you," she said softly. "The Diallo name still means something," Laurent continued. "Not because of what was taken, but because of what your family built before the fall. That legacy doesn't require reclamation. It exists. It always has." He handed her a card. "When you're ready, if you're ready, call me. Not for pity, not for redemption, for partnership between equals." She took the card, slipping it into her clutch without looking at it. An hour after her arrival, Adama left the Silvercrest estate. The photographers were still outside, though fewer now, the major arrivals already documented. They raised their cameras as she emerged, capturing her descent down the stone steps. She didn't pose. She didn't perform. She simply walked, her midnight blue dress moving with her like water, her posture unchanged from when she'd arrived. The same black car waited. The same driver opened the door. As the vehicle pulled away from the glowing estate, Adama looked back once. Through the windows, she could see the party continuing, the elite mingling, the champagne flowing, the careful dance of wealth and influence proceeding as it always had. She'd been part of that world once. She could be again, if she chose. The offers tonight had made that clear. The Diallo name, properly leveraged, could open doors that 5 years as a waitress had closed. But she wasn't certain that was the door she wanted to open. The car wound through the quiet streets, leaving the estate's lights behind. Adama caught her reflection in the window, composed, elegant, present. She thought about Seraphine's words. Asterisk, you're not asking for anything. You're reminding them of something they tried to forget. Asterisk. She'd done that. She'd walked into the room that had erased her and refused to disappear. But more than that, and she was only now understanding this fully, she'd proven something to herself. That 5 years of invisibility hadn't broken her. That carrying trays and enduring dismissal hadn't diminished who she fundamentally was. She'd never actually been invisible. They'd just refused to see her. And that refusal said everything about them and nothing about her worth. The car stopped outside her modest apartment. The building looked different now, not smaller exactly, but less like a prison and more like a choice she'd made to survive. There was dignity in that choice, she realized. Strength in the quiet endurance that had carried her through. Adama stepped out of the car, the night air cool against her skin. She climbed the steps to her door, her heels clicking softly on concrete that was nothing like the marble of Silvercrest Estate. Inside, she removed her dress carefully, hanging it with the same precision Seraphine had taught her years ago. She washed her face, removed the elegant simplicity of her appearance, and stood in her small bathroom looking at herself without artifice. Tomorrow, she might return to the restaurant. Or she might call Laurent. Or she might do something else entirely. Something she hadn't yet imagined but could now, finally, consider. The future was uncertain, but it was hers again. She'd walked into that gala carrying 5 years of invisibility, expecting nothing except the chance to remind herself she still existed. She'd walked away carrying something different, possibility. They'd invited her to be a joke, but she walked away as a legacy.